Hello, this is Kim Nelson. I'm going to do a brief video, hopefully, on just how to draw or sketch the side view of stones in settings. Specifically, faceted stones in basket settings. So I'm just going to draw start with drawing a basic earring form using, start by sketching a basic earring sketch that has a few good earring size stones in it. Something like that. And then maybe a couple of smaller stones. Just to keep it simple. A smaller marquee and a smaller marquee and a smaller pair. With a motion that kind of swings forward from the ear. Okay, something like that. All right, now I don't know what size these are. I'm gonna look at them and think, okay, I'm looking at least an 8x5, maybe larger. So I'm gonna pop on over to the Stoller website and get some dimensions for stones. So here on their website for basic amethysts, and these would probably be diamond what I'm drawing, but still, you know, if it's available in amethyst, it's available in a diamond, is the theory. So I've got an 8x5 here for a pair, an 8x6, a 9x6. I'm going to create a 9x6 and an 8x5 canvas for starters. So new canvas, set it to millimeters. So that's 5x8, 300, create, and I'll bucket fill it. Oh, gray is fine. Copy. Control Tab to get back over into Photoshop and paste. So that's the 8x5. That's pretty good, actually. There's an 8x6, which would be a little bit fatter, and I think that would work better. So I'm going to create one of those. Same idea, Control A, paint bucket fill, copy, paste. So either one of those would be good. Now I could label these. So I can remember. That smaller one is quite a bit smaller, so either a 6x4 or a 5x3. I don't want to go below a 6x4, so I'll do that. Paste that in. Okay. And for that marquee, I'm going to say a 7 by 3.5 would be a logical way to go. Verify that's available. I'm sure it is. 7 by 3.5. So millimeters, 3.5 by 7. Control A, paint bucket fill, copy, and paste. There. So these will allow me to draw stones that are close to the actual size of the ones in my drawing. I'm going to start with the 8x5. That's the one I want to begin with. I'm going to set symmetry. And this will be vertical. I'm going to place it roughly in the middle here. Activate my brush. That will be too big of a brush for what I want to do. I'm going to drop it down to 3. And I will draw my pear shape. Sketch it. I do want to put a dot here that indicates kind of the center line. Pear shapes are built upon a round stone. So when you sketch a pear, you can visualize a round brilliant that's had a point added to it. Now, I don't really need to draw facet lines in a sketch, but with the symmetry active, it's pretty easy to facet one of these up. Something like that. And we have top view of a basic pear-shaped stone. So that's one of our 3 stones. And actually, it'll be helpful to me to turn off that layer for a minute. Okay, that's enough. I can sit here and play with this. This is not the point of the video, so there's really no point in doing so. Cue it somewhere in here. Now I'm going to want that 6x4. And symmetry, you're going to transform it just so I can drag it to the middle of this box. And once again, gesture in a round, turn it into a pair, and if I want to, I can gesture in some facets as well. And that's enough. I put an aculet somewhere in this area, maybe a little further up. And now I have the seven by 5 for the marquee. Same ideas. Transform that symmetry, although this time I'll have dual axis symmetry. Try and center it up. And indicate aculet. And once again, if I want to indicate facets, not a lot of work to do. So there are my stones. So now what I need to do is decide, position them and decide if I need more information. Really the most important information when you're drawing stones like this, more than the facets, is where the center lines are. So I'm going to put this stone back. I'm going to pick a different color just to make it easier to see. So dropping down to a 2-pixel brush. When you're actually sketching, you would do this by eye more than you would go to the trouble to actually precisely draw it up. But go ahead and bring back my symmetry. Looks like it's lined up, except for I need vertical rather than split axis or dual axis. That's fine. And about where the keelet is, the fattest point of the stone. Maybe a little lower. Okay. And the last one. Something like that. Okay, that's the end of the symmetry. Now, I can take these canvases and pretty much do away with them. This is my initial sketch, which I am now going to take down very transparent. And I'm going to replace it with my actual stones. Now this is here. Going to use the rotate tool and rotate it to match my sketch. And I'll just let them overlap each other. That is the intention. And so that pretty much duplicates what I had in my sketch. I would like to turn these to multiply layers, just so as they overlap each other. They don't obscure each other. Now that I have the actual cleanly drawn stones, I can make a little better decisions about angles and positioning. Fine. Now, to explain the drawing of the side view of these stones and their settings, I'm going to use each stone one at a time. So I'll start with the large stone. For the large stone, I'll have a bit of a V-prong. And then 4 other prongs located roughly here. All right. I'm going to put the girdle in the side view for this stone here. Going to bring down some guides. Like so. Now the pavilion of this stone should be half of this distance, which I can measure, or I can do by eye. I'm going to do it by eye. Culet's about here. And this distance is roughly equal to this distance. If I'm going to make a mistake, I'm going to err on the side of it being too deep. One side of the pavilion, other side of the pavilion. The crown is about half of this distance, less than half of this distance. So I'm going to call the crown height somewhere in there. And then the sides of the crown. And I'm using the Photoshop technique where I start a drawing with a dot and then hold the shift key for the second dot to constrain it and make a straight line. The setting for this, I'm going to have a gallery wire, a third or above, an under bezel, roughly that thick, and a base gallery wire about where the culet is and about that thick. Going to draw my prong. And my next prong. And my next prong. Like so. The prong in the back I won't see, and I won't see this prong either. because they're obscured by the stone. So I'll clean this up. Now I'm drawing this stone first because it's the deepest stone. All of the other stones will be lower than this stone because it is the biggest stone, and so half of its minor length or width or diameter, depending on the shape of the stone, half of that for this stone is going to be deeper than it will for any of the other stones. Clear away the guides. And tidy this up. That's the first of our 3 stones. Now, the stone is angling. It's angled this way. It's not straight. So there is foreshortening going on here. But it's so minor that the side view doesn't make it apparent. The side view reflects it. It is accurate. But you wouldn't look at this and go, oh, that's a foreshortened setting. Except for if you had a practiced eye, you would realize that the setting seems fat, thick, stumpy. And the reason it seems that way is because the full length of the stone is not being shown here. The full length of the stone, if it were straight up and down, would be longer. And that would make this setting appear thinner. Next stone. So I'm going to turn off. Unfortunately, I drew that on the same layer. That's okay. No, it isn't. All right. I'm going to cut this out. Control X, but I'm going to Control Shift V to put it back in the exact same place. And I'm going to kick down the opacity on this stone a bit. So it doesn't get in the way. Next stone is going to be in depth, in terms of depth of this pair. Because it's a 4 by 6 instead of a 3.5 by 7. So we're going to be dealing with half of that 4. Go ahead and draw the prongs on. It'll be the same arrangement as before. 5 prongs. If the stone gets much smaller than this, I would drop down to 3 prongs, 2 at the back. And 1 at the front. Sorry, I started drawing on the wrong layer. And in terms of the design, it would have made no difference, but in terms of the video, it would. It's going to be harder to follow if I don't. keep things on the proper layer. Okay, so there's that stone. So its girdle is going to be something, I'll put its girdle here. Temporarily, I will move this stone, its side view, down into position when I'm through with it. So this is the length of the stone, foreshortened as it is. Culet's about here. I know that the stone is this deep. Something like that. So again, I'll use Photoshop straight line drawing tools to get that where I want it. And I know that that will put the crown height about half of that, less than half of that, somewhere about there. And the extent of my table is like that. So something like that. And that's kind of skewed, and in real life it might be, but I don't like the way it looks. So I will go ahead and center it up a little. It may actually be skewed because the foreshortening that's taking place might be playing havoc with the profile. Because we are really looking very much more at the heel or back of the stone than we are its point. In fact, its point isn't going to be visible to us. So prongs, we have one here. I can gauge that by eye. We have another one here. We have another one here. And the V prong is basically invisible to us. Gallery wire, I'll put here. Under bezel, somewhere in here. And now I'll draw the prongs. Since these are individual settings and not a grouping of stones, I will boat the prongs that I see more or less from the side or the profile because it's a prettier setting. This prong, which is basically facing me, it won't show as being very curved because I'm looking straight at it. But these two prongs are not facing me as directly, so I can show some of the taper or bend. Now, the work I'm doing right now is really for the video's purposes. In reality, I would draw this in situ. I would draw it where it is, and I would gauge where these galleries and whatnot went based on the bigger stone, because they have to all relate to each other. But I want you to see the thought process in drawing the side view of a basket setting. Okay, so there it is. This is probably a little more rounded than it would actually be. It doesn't really matter. But primarily because it's going to be invisible in a minute. But for now, I can put it there. I'm going to move this setting now back into position where it will be. Okay, so now that it's back there in position, I'll take it into multiply mode so we can see through it. And we'll talk about what won't be visible. Everything from this stone and its setting is in front of this stone. This stone is behind. So anywhere this is in front, that setting will disappear. So I will remove that information. Like so. Now I'm going to go work on the marquee. Go ahead and combine these. And take the opacity down a bit. And bring up the marquee. The same process here. Clear the guides. Go ahead and draw the prongs. This stone will have 2 V prongs. And it's a small enough stone that I could get by with just a single prong at the sides, but that will kind of flatten it out a little bit, so I'll give it 6 prongs, which is an awful lot of metal for 3.5 by 7 stone. But it would be the most attractive solution. Okay, I'll put the girdle line temporarily here. Bring down my guides for the stone itself. For the culet. Culet's going to be this distance, which is about there. Use the point shift click technique in Photoshop to gesture in the pavilion. The crown is less than half, so somewhere in that area. Something like that. Okay, so now the location of the prongs, the end prongs, the under bezel first. Under bezel will be less than 1/3, so high up here. Gallery wire, clear of the culet, something like this, something like this. Maybe a little thicker. Prong. 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 It's going to be just on this side of that red line and less than midway from this line, about here. I could pull down guides, but I can do it by eye just as quickly. This is facing fairly straight on towards me, so not much of a curve. This is a little more rotated away, so it's going to flow. And I've made it a little too close to that red line, that guideline. It's going to be more like this, which means that it's going to partially obscure and overlap the end prong, which is accurate. That is what it would actually do. The under bezel ties in here and here. Gallery wire ties in here and here. This prong, since it's fairly straight on, we won't really see the interaction very much with the under bezel of the gallery. But here at this end prong, once again, we will. And that is a pretty decent little sketch of what that setting would be from the side. Okay, so I'm going to move it down. Into position. Okay, and then we're going to take a look, going to clear guides. We're going to take a look at our sketch. And we're going to see that the side view of this stone is going to be in front of everything else. It is in front of the big stone and it's in front of the small marquee. So that being the case, we have to look at a few things here. One thing I want to look at, and I'll make this in multiply mode so we can see through it, is that the under bezels should line up between the stones, if they can. And if they can't, they should at least be able to solder into each other if they're not perfectly lined up, which this can. This would solder into, actually it would solder into the prong here, but it could solder into the under bezel as well. It's close enough. What is becoming apparent, however, is that the backmost stone is pretty much obscured. So even though I did go to the trouble to draw it carefully, it is covered up. It's also interesting that proportionately speaking, the top of its table ended up being the same pretty much as the marquee. Now, any of this detail that I can keep, I will, because I drew it, but also because it makes it look more accurate if you can see the other setting in the background. But honestly, very little of that will survive. A couple of dots, which will actually probably be more confusing than they are helpful. See, this line is actually that back setting, but it's confusing because just our pavilion line is hidden on the marquee, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. But I'll leave it. And there we go. That would be an accurate sketched side view of this selection of stones. As you can see, it's pretty busy. It's a lot of work. In reality, sketching, I wouldn't go into nearly this much detail because that's what I have Rhino for. But it is useful to know that you can. You can hand draw in Photoshop and with paper and pencil. Really valid and accurate side views of these sophisticated and complex little settings. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching.